like to call to order the Hatfield Township Board of Commissioners regular meeting for November 28, 2018. Roll call.
President Zipfel.
Here.
Vice President Hughes.
Here.
Commissioner Andrus.
Here.
Commissioner Rogers.
Here.
Commissioner Thomas.
Here.
I'm going to ask our Chief of Police to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. If you would, Chief Tierney. All right, before we begin, I need to announce that the board met in executive session this evening before the meeting to discuss personnel and contract negotiations. All right, with that, I will entertain a motion for approval of tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Thomas, second by Commissioner Rogers. All in favor of approving tonight's agenda that's up on the screen and that's in front of you, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, that is approved and we can move forward. Consent items. Is there a motion to move the consent items in your agenda into the record?
So moved.
Motion by
Second.
Commissioner Andrews, second by Commissioner Thomas. Those consent items are the Board of Commissioners regular meeting minutes of October 24, the Board of Commissioners workshop meeting minutes of November 14, the Treasurer's report for the month of November, and the bills payable, paid bills, 0. Haven't seen that in a while.
I don't think I've ever seen it.
I guess it's a good thing.
I guess.
Hey, in my house, anytime you don't have to pay a bill, that's a good thing. Unpaid bills, $291,906.63. All in favor of moving those items into the record, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, those are moved into the record. All right, citizens' comments. Folks, if you have a comment with regard to the rezone application, please wait until we entertain that application. Otherwise, if you have something else that you'd like to discuss or bring to our attention that is on the agenda, please come forward now. All right, we have a nice crowd, but no one's coming up to the podium, so we're going to jump right into our action items. And first is the rezone that we have been meeting about or been a part of our meetings for some time. So in front of us is Ordinance 681. Should I first two together? Okay. So you're actually reading my mind now. Okay. Is there a motion to approve Ordinance 681 and 682, which are related to the Pulte Home, Baum Farm, 491 40-foot road zoning text amendment to add active adult community as a permitted use in the multifamily elderly district, and the zoning map amendment from RA1 and LI1 to multifamily elderly district? Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Thomas, second by Commissioner Andrus. Okay, so now we're going to have some discussion. Citizens, residents, anyone who is here who would like to discuss this. Some of you seem new to us as far as some prior meetings. Maybe you read about the rezone in the newspaper or saw it on television. What you're looking at is the proposed construction, but tonight what we are discussing and what we are considering and singularly considering is the issue of whether the property should be, or a portion of the property should be rezoned for residential use as another portion of it is already zoned for residential use. So if you have any input, please come up to the podium now before the commissioners give their comments and I call the vote. Yes, sir. If you could. We'd like you to come up to the podium.
My name is Richard Baum. I live in the 4th Ward of Hatfield Township. And I just wanted to say I believe there's a misprint on the agenda. One should be, they're the same number, and shouldn't one be 221?
I'm not sure what you mean by 221.
Well, both items 1 and 2 are listed as 491 40-foot road.
Yes.
And I believe one should be 221 40-foot road.
Oh, sorry. I don't know.
Correct. It's correct in the ordinance.
Correct. So the agenda may or may not be accurate, but the ordinance is. So, but thank you for that correction.
Just to be clear, too, the ordinance covers all 3 parcels in question, regardless of the address.
Okay. So since I don't see anyone else going up to the podium, let me make a couple of quick comments. I want to thank the neighbors around the area, in particular those at the MacArthur Drive neighborhood. We've gone over the years through a number of these rezones, and I have to tell you, I have not been involved with such a thoughtful group of people as those folks in particular. We've had multiple meetings. The one that will always stick out with me is one in September of this year, where there must have been 40 or 45 residents from the MacArthur Drive neighborhood, but also near that. And what a thoughtful group of people it was who understood the pros and cons of the rezone, the difficulties associated with the traffic that will come from that, the alternative possibilities that we considered and that were suggested with regard to access and egress. And quite frankly, I've been on this board going on 10 years now, and I've never seen a group of people who were educated so well and thoughtful enough about it. I do have one comment from a resident that had not been raised previously that is probably more informational than not for the applicant, and I have promised that I would read this. It raises the question of whether what would be done with the visitor parking spaces within the development, and could something be done to ensure that overflow parking would not spill into the MacArthur Drive area. I don't know if the applicant has any opinion on that or would like to comment now. Outside in the MacArthur community, I've already promised one of the resident who sent this, that it would be our responsibility as the township to ensure that overflow parking would be consistent with what our neighborhood expects in the MacArthur Drive area. But, Joe, I posed to you the question of parking spaces for visitors.
Thank you, Mr. President. Joe Cools on behalf of the applicant. When we initially made the application, we had a draft ordinance which was submitted as part of the application, and that issue was not addressed initially in the draft. But in the process of reviewing that ordinance with your staff at one point in time, I think it may have been in late August, early September, had a round of changes that they suggested to the applicant, and we accepted all the changes proposed by staff. And one of them related specifically to reserve parking. And the ordinance, which is before you this evening, has a clause which requires 1/2 space per residential unit, in addition to the 2 dedicated spaces per unit that everyone expects in reference to these types of uses, for the actual person who owns and occupies the unit. The provision goes on to say, let me say, in this case, that could very well mean 185 spaces in addition to what's typically required, strictly as visitor parking. And the provision goes on to say that visitor parking will be provided in a design approved by the Board of Commissioners. So we'll need to show you as part of the land development process that not only are we providing the spaces which are typically associated with these units, but we're providing overflow parking to the tune of an additional 180, 185 spaces sprinkled throughout the development in a design that is to your satisfaction.
While I have you, Mr. Cools, I believe that the applicant also did a traffic study as recent as either yesterday or the day before, and there were at least 2 or 3 residents who asked for that. We appreciate the applicant doing that, and if you don't mind sharing publicly the results of that traffic count.
Sure. The initial traffic report that was tendered included counts at the MacArthur Drive 40-foot road intersection that were completed on May 31st, I believe. It was the week immediately after Memorial Day. There was some concern and question raised by a few residents regarding that date. They believed that it had the possibility of producing aberrational results because it was so close to Memorial Day. So we went back out yesterday and did AM peak hour and PM peak hour counts again at that intersection. And obviously, different days have different exact counts. Based upon industry experience, it's expected that a typical day versus a typical day could vary as much as 5 to 10%. Our test done on May 31st and on November 27 only differed 3.3%. So that's virtually the same. And what I just realized later this afternoon was the counts that were done on May 31st were done at a point in time when the Dunkin' Donuts was not opened. And in fact, yesterday the Dunkin' Donuts was opened. So the counts are even closer than we might expect. The conclusion being, of course, that we've confirmed with a very high level of certainty that the test results that were included in the report are very accurate.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
One last issue that was been, Mr. Coles, you're okay. Yep. Just some comments from residents, just generally. Throughout the process, there was some discussion about whether there would be access and egress from this constructed area, from this gated community into, for example, MacArthur or other areas. And the overwhelming, I will tell the residents that are here and those that are watching, the overwhelming, and I mean overwhelming, opinion of those residents who live in that area is that they do not want access either into or out of the gated community. I know that we had some discussions at least 2 meetings publicly here, and then one in greater depth in the September meeting that I described. And again, just so that there's clarity on it, I made phone calls, emails, I posted into the MacArthur Drive Facebook account so that I would have access to those folks. And the overwhelming opinion from what I've got from people, more often on a personal level with a phone call or otherwise, was that they did not want access or egress into their neighborhood. All right, any other commissioners with questions or comments?
I just want to comment that I think it's a mistake not having a connection there. The people came in a few years back because they had a problem getting in and out of there. We lowered the speed limit. You're going to see 40-foot road get widened all the way down to Clemens Road with this development, okay, maybe a little bit past that. You're also talking about a third turning lane right there where MacArthur is, so it's only going to make it harder to get across. And if you don't get a connection now, you never will. And if the road ever gets expanded any bigger than it is, the people on MacArthur will have a problem. So I can't support this.
All right, any other questions, comments from commissioners or residents? All right, seeing none, then I will call a question with regard to ordinance number 681 and 682. I'll call the question. All in favor of those ordinances say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
So those 2 ordinances are approved. All right, we have 3 more action items. The next one is Resolution 18-30. Is there a motion for approval with regard to the Walnut Street subdivision and land development consistent with Resolution 18-30? The chair will make the motion. Is there a second? Okay, second from Commissioner Andrus. Aaron, are you going to walk us through this one?
I think Mr. Ramey's going to take the
Kenneth?
lead here.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is, as we discussed on November 14th, I believe, about 2 weeks ago, we discussed this project at the workshop meeting, and it had previously been discussed at several planning commission meetings as well. This project involves a 9-lot subdivision of a tract of land which is at the end of the existing cul-de-sac on Fortuna Drive. It extends from Fortuna Drive out to Walnut Street. Proposes access to the 9 lots through an extension of the Fortuna Drive cul-de-sac and provides for an emergency access out to Walnut Street. The project has been discussed, as I say, by the Planning Commission. It's been recommended by the County Planning Commission, and there was a recommendation from our Planning Commission with several conditions and comments. Those conditions have all been incorporated into the resolution, which is before you this evening. The resolution has been signed by the applicant, and the applicant has agreed to all of the conditions contained within it. So at this point, the project is ready for action by the board.
All right. Any questions, comments from commissioners or residents?
Got a couple comments. One is, I don't particularly care for this subdivision, but it does adhere to all the rules and regulations the township has. The only way we're able to strengthen this is to have requiring a homeowners association, which will allow us to enforce some of the regulations as, communicate many of the regulations as in terms of coverage, things of that nature, and some of the requirements for drainage. That's the best way to protect that community and let them know what they're getting themselves into when they buy the house, what the requirements.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right, then I'll call a question. All in favor of resolution?
President, we have a question.
Oh, yes, sir. Please.
Paul Mort, 282 Fortuna Drive. I agree with you, Mr. Andrus. This is not a favored development, but I do appreciate all the efforts that the commissioners went through, and particularly Mr. McAdams, to review this project in depth. I have just a couple quick comments that I'd like to make. Some of them are personal, some of them are really questions on this resolution. Talked before about lot number 9, the one immediately next to my house. I know that the developer has met the minimum setback requirements. I know he's pushed it a little bit further, but I know he can do more. And if you eliminated the side entrance driveway and went with a front entrance driveway to the garage, you would actually reduce the amount of impervious cover and make the whole thing better. But I know he may or may not choose to change that. There's a note in the resolution that the applicant has to post a security deposit of $12,600 for trees that may die, and there's a stipulation that it's within 5 years from the date of dedication of public improvements. This is item number 2 on the resolution. When does that clock really start? I'm not quite following when the date of dedication of public improvements is.
Still doesn't. I can feel that. So the date of dedication is when the street would be dedicated to the township? It's at the very end of all the construction?
After all the houses are built, the infiltration berms are built, then it gets dedicated. So it truly is at the end.
Yes.
Okay. Item 10, homeowners association, there has to be a detailed maintenance requirements in the plan. I hope that the engineer of record has input into that and specifically details maintenance that has to be done every season of the year. As I've noted many times, there's leaves there that have to be cleared constantly if an infiltration berm is going to work. And the engineer of record has to be held responsible to make his plan on paper work in the field, which there have been serious questions from the township's engineer about whether it can work. There's a note that there's an easement on my property that would be vacated. I don't have an issue with that being vacated. I would just ask that the vacation be properly recorded, and I receive a copy of that. And I assume that any recording fees would be paid for by the developer. I've made this comment before about being able to take what's put down on paper actually into the field. I haven't seen the drawings recently, but I'm hoping that because the developer took credit for wooded areas, a certain acreage of wooded areas, that there's a meets and bounds description associated with what he's taking that can then be transferred by a surveyor into the field, and that meets and bounds can be shown on each individual deed. So I hope that this isn't just a block of this is the wooded area and I draw a circle. I hope there's an actual line that can be struck on the deeds. I don't know if that's the case with this plan yet. And my concern is really being able to take what seems to work on paper and implement it in the field. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is to give a contractor survey points that he can lay out. That's my concern with the wooded areas.
It's
It's not common to assign meets and bounds descriptions for wooded areas. It is often done for wetlands or floodplains, but in terms of wooded areas, it's not generally done. We have not required that on this particular plan. What I can tell you is that the tree protection areas that are shown on the plan that have been approved by our office and will be by Conservation District, those areas are generally staked out by a surveyor at the beginning of construction. Our office goes out, as does the Township Landscape Architect, and we inspect the limits of disturbance, and we inspect the stakeout and the installation of the tree protection fence to make sure that they're compliant with the plan. Once construction is finished, those fences go away. They get removed. So I can't, we just generally do not ask for meets and bounds descriptions on tree areas. And I can tell you that on other projects, there are, if the project happens to be wooded, almost everyone tries to preserve as much as they can. It depends on the project, but it does happen. So, you know, I'm not sure, I can't tell you that we're going to put meets and bounds description on it.
I agree with what you said, that it's not common. My only concern is that somehow there has to be a way to take the assumptions that were made as part of the stormwater management plan, which I understand was a certain credit for acreage of woods, and transfer that into permanence. I don't know how that gets done, but somehow it has to happen.
We talked about that briefly in homeowners association for replacement of trees and so forth. How will that get communicated?
Well, first let me point out that we normally only guarantee trees and things like that for 18 months from dedication. So the applicant has agreed to abide by this escrow that we normally don't get and this 5-year period that we normally don't get. But there's also a requirement that my office will review those homeowners association documents, and I'll be doing that in concert with the township engineer to make sure that all the constraints we can possibly have are in those documents recorded against the properties. I mean, we can only do so much. We can record things against the lots, we can inspect things, we can send notices, but we can't stand there, you know, all day and make sure that everyone's complying. So the township staff has done as much as we possibly can to secure what is on the plans will actually be what happens out in the field.
I appreciate that. The comment in Mr. McAdams' review letter about prior to the occupancy of the lots, an as-built plan will be prepared and reviewed by the township to confirm that the appropriate surface area and volume have been provided. Typical statement, but it leads to the next question: what happens if it's not? At that point, what are we doing?
When we get the as-built plan that's been prepared by a surveyor, we review it, compare it, and if the infiltration berm has not provided the area and the volume that was shown on the approved plan, we reject that plan and they have to fix it. They have to go out physically in the field and either extend the berm. They have to come up with the volume that was there somehow. And we will not approve that as-built plan until that is finished to our satisfaction. I mean, I'm not sure what other, what else we could do. I mean, that's,
I mean, there's only so much we can do. The property owner has rights. There are ordinances here that the township is limited to. We're limited to state permits, county permits, federal permits, and our ordinances. And we've actually gone above and beyond. I know there's been a lot of discontent with this subdivision and frustration, I think, on everyone's level. So we have tightened the screws as much as we possibly can, even more than usual, because the applicant has agreed to things that they normally wouldn't, to make this the best development that we can. We're going to monitor it. We have some police powers under our ordinances should things not be done right, but that's the best we can do.
I appreciate that, and I am sincere when I say I know you took my comments to heart. I appreciate all the effort that went into this, and I know your hands are tied. But the final comment I would make, and it speaks to when things don't go right, what do you do? I'm new to this township, but I'm looking at the meeting minutes from prior commissioners' meetings. And going back to 2015, Chelsea Court, this developer's prior development in this township. There's still an item that says, construction is complete. Required corrections discovered during the 18-month maintenance period have not been resolved. So, I mean, I have no idea what those mean, but that's been going on since at least 2015, and nothing has been corrected.
I'll comment on that too. So we hold escrow. When any developer wants to develop, when this goes in, before the plans are recorded, we hold 110% of the costs of all the improvements but for the houses. Okay, so everything from silt fence, temporary basins, road construction, the as-built, all of that is included in this 110% that the township holds. And the developer, as work gets done, can have things inspected, and then we can release money as work is approved. So we always hold back at least 15% of the costs of this development or any development to fix any problem that the developer hasn't fixed. I'm not certain that those minutes that you're referring to have been updated. I'm not certain that there's been a recent inspection, but I'm certain that the township always has the money to go back in and fix things should the developer not want to. We also have the ability to sue. It's also in the development agreements. They sign agreements which give us the right to go after them in the event we don't have enough money. But there's a mechanism in the Pennsylvania law that allows us to hold those escrows and to go after the developer. That's pretty good odds in our favor.
I appreciate that. I'm just making a comment that since 2015, something has been outstanding. It hasn't been corrected, and I am taking a leap here and saying, is that same thing going to happen on this development?
Mr. Moore, those comments were from actually well before 15, and there were mistakes made by consultants that are no longer with the township, and we were put in a situation where our hands were completely tied with that development, and it was some minor issues have been left outstanding. Nothing to the extent of what you are concerned with yours, but with the consultants we have now, I can assure you that will not happen with this development.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? Comments or questions from commissioners? If not, I will call the question. All in favor of Resolution 18-30, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, that is approved. All right, action item number 4, Resolution number 18-31. Is there a motion for approval with regard to the Pecora Corporation Warehouse Expansion Land Development Waiver?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Rogers.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Andrus. Ken, I think you have this one?
Yes, thank you. We discussed this at our at our workshop meeting as well on the 14th, and this is a proposed addition at the Clemens Business Center. It's over existing impervious cover, so there is no stormwater management necessary. There was a setback variance required from the Zoning Hearing Board, which was granted, and the applicant, because there is no stormwater management work and because there are no public improvements, the applicant has requested a waiver from the land development process. It's been discussed by the Planning and Zoning Committee, and I believe at our workshop meeting it was discussed without serious comment. Since then, a resolution's been prepared and executed by the owners of the complex, and this matter is ready for the board to vote.
Other than going in front of the planning commission, it still goes through the same permitting and inspection and everything else that everybody else goes through.
It will go through exactly the same process as far as the plan review and inspection. It's just a bit more streamlined because it didn't require any stormwater management or public improvements.
All right. Commissioners, any questions or comments? Residents, any questions or comments? All right, I will call the question. All in favor of Resolution 18-31, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, that is approved. One last action item. Actually, we have an addendum, so we have 2 more action items. But the next one is a motion for approval for a police car purchase in the amount of $34,629. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Andrus, second by Commissioner Thomas. Aaron, if I recall, we discussed this last meeting, and it is a housekeeping item of a police vehicle that was already made a part of our budget from last year, but best accounting practices are that we vote on these individually?
Correct, vote on them publicly, and this was funded by the sale of police vehicles that have already served its useful purpose. And our practice is to sell older equipment and use that to buy newer equipment and vehicles. And this is the last purchase of the year.
All right. Any questions or comments, Commissioners? All right, then I'll call the question. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, that is approved. We have one last action item, which just came to us earlier today, really. And I'm sure many of you know that our police force is the best around. And on a periodic basis, we have our contract negotiations with them. And after very cordial and also in the best interest of both parties' negotiations, an agreement has been made for a 4-year contract that we just reached, and have the agreement before the Commissioners today. And so before us tonight for approval is a motion to approve the settlement and collective bargaining agreement between the Hatfield Township and Hatfield Township Police Bargaining Unit. So as the chair, I'll make the motion. Is there a second? Second. Second by Commissioner Andrus. Any questions or comments by Commissioners? Other than I know that the staff and the bargaining unit really worked together to do what was in the best interest of everyone, and we're very appreciative of the fantastic job they do, and I think they're very appreciative of the great staff that we have. So with that, I'll call the question. All in favor of approving that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, that is approved. All right, citizens' comments. Any citizens' comments on even non-agenda items? All right, if there's none, then we'll have a motion to adjourn. Motion by Commissioner Thomas.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Andrus. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, we're adjourned. Thanks for coming out, folks.